I have to admit, when I first looked at the stack of research for this deep dive, I actually thought I was looking at a typo.
A typo? How so?
Well, because we're talking about Islamic history, right? And usually that narrative is pretty set in stone for most people. You have the Sunni majority, you have the Shia minority, and the history of the region is basically those two tectonic plates grinding against each other for 1,400 years.
Right, yeah. That is the standard History 101 version. It's the binary everyone knows.
But then I see this term in the sources, the third way. And not just some modern political movement, but something claiming to be older than both of those major groups. We're looking at a book today that claims to be a survivor from the very beginning. The Musnad of Rabi ibn Habib.
It is a fascinating text, and the people who follow this text, the Ibadis, they say it's the oldest, purest record of the Prophet Muhammad's words in existence, which is, well, it's a massive claim.
A huge claim, and just so you, the listener, know, we aren't talking about a tiny fringe cult here.
No, absolutely not. The Ibadi school is the dominant form of Islam in Oman. It has deep historical roots in Zanzibar, parts of Algeria, Libya. For them, this book, which is properly called Al-Jami al-Sahih, is their absolute bedrock.
But for the rest of the world, it's basically a ghost.
Exactly. Outside of those communities, it's virtually unknown.
And that ghost is what we are going to try and grab a hold of today. Because the deeper I dug into this, the more it felt like a detective story. We've got a framework here from the researchers called the 100 Taboo Questions.
Right, and we should clarify, these aren't devotional questions about how to pray. They are completely forensic.
Yeah, we have critiques from Sunni scholars, Shia theologians, secular historians, even atheists. And they were all asking the same fundamental thing. Is this book actually a time capsule from the 8th century? Or is it a brilliant forgery designed to give a minority group a history they didn't actually have?
And that right there is the tension we need to sit with today. We aren't here to take a side or say it's entirely true or it's a total fabrication. We are just here to look at the evidence presented in all these sources.
Because if this book is what it claims to be, it changes how we understand the origins of Islam.
It completely rewrites the timeline. And if it's not, then it's one of the most successful literary constructions in history.
So let's start with the man on the cover, the author, Rabi ibn Habib. Who was he?
So Rabi is, he's elusive. He supposedly died around 786 CE, which puts him right in the middle of the 8th century. He was based in Basra in Iraq.
Which was a pretty big deal at the time, right?
Oh, Basra was the center of the universe back then. It was this chaotic melting pot for every theology, philosophy, and political movement you can imagine.
Okay, but here is my first problem with the narrative. If he was this titan of theology in the absolute center of the intellectual universe, why is he so incredibly hard to find in the history books?
You're talking about the biographical dictionaries?
Yeah, I'm looking at the notes on the read-along literature. These are the big biographical dictionaries written by mainstream Sunni scholars later on. They list thousands of scholars, but Al-Rabi, barely a whisper.
It's true. He is almost completely missing from the mainstream who's who of the time. And for a secular historian or a critic, that is a massive red flag. The obvious argument is, well, if you were this important, people should have known your name.
So how did the Ibadis explain that? I mean, how do you just lose a founding father?
They argue that we are looking at history entirely through the lens of the empire. You have to remember, the early Ibadis weren't a recognized school of thought with, tenure at a state university.
Right, they were the opposition.
Exactly. They were an underground revolutionary movement. They were actively resisting the Umayyad and then the Abbasid empires.
So they were essentially hiding.
They were practicing kitman.
Kitman. Let's define that for the listener.
It roughly translates to secrecy or concealment. It was a strict survival mechanism. When the caliph is actively looking to execute anyone who challenges his authority, you don't publish a public directory of your top scholars. You don't hold open lectures in the town square.
That makes sense.
So the Ibadi defense is that Al-Rabi isn't in the mainstream books because he was operating in secret cells, in the shadows. His absence isn't proof he didn't exist. It's actually proof that the kitman worked.
I mean, that is a very convenient defense, though, isn't it? Like, you can't find evidence of him because he was just that good at hiding.
Critics definitely point that out. It's unfalsifiable.
But let's look at the text itself, because the structure of this book is also really weird compared to the standard collections.
Weird how? What stood out to you?
Well, I've seen pages of Sahih Bukhari or other major Sunni collections. The sourcing looks like a giant spider web. You have a saying of the prophet and then a massive list of narrators, like Person A told B, who heard it from C, who happened to see D. It's this huge, sprawling network of cross-referencing.
Right, multiple chains of transmission.
Exactly. But al-Rabi's book, it looks like a straight line.
It's incredibly vertical. That is what they call the golden chain. Almost every single report in the book follows the exact same narrow path. It goes from al-Rabi up to his teacher Abu Ubaidah, up to his teacher Jabir ibn Zayd, to a companion of the Prophet, usually Ibn Abbas, and then straight to the Prophet himself. It's a total bottleneck.
Which, honestly, if I'm trying to sell this book to someone, I'd say is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Fewer people in the chain means fewer chances for the historical game of telephone to get messed up.
And that is exactly the Ibadi argument. They say it is the shortest, purest chain in existence, absolute high fidelity.
But flip that coin. If you are a skeptical historian or a Sunni critic looking at this centuries later, that bottleneck looks incredibly suspicious.
Because there's no way to double check it.
Right.
The standard mainstream method relies on heavy corroboration. If 5 different people from 5 different cities recount the exact same event, it's highly likely to be true. But here, you have a single isolated stream.
So if one person in that 3-link chain is lying,
or if the whole chain is just invented after the fact, the whole thing collapses. It completely bypasses the peer review system of the 8th century, so to speak.
and it gets even messier when we talk about the physical book itself. Because the book sitting on the shelves in Muscat today, the one people read, al-Rabi didn't actually write that physical arrangement, did he?
No, he didn't. And this is a historical detail that critics really latch onto. The version we actually have is called Tartib al-Musnad. It was arranged by a later scholar named al-Waridlani
And when did he live?
in the 12th century.
Okay, wait, so al-Rabi is 8th century, al-Waridlani is 12th century. That is a 400-year gap? That's like me publishing a book today and claiming it's the lost handwritten diary of Shakespeare based on what?
That is the ultimate taboo question for the critics. Did al-Waridlani just organize old, dusty manuscripts he found in a library, or did he, creatively edit them, or even write them himself to legitimize his community?
How does the tradition bridge that gap? Because 400 years is a really long time for fragile manuscripts to just hang around.
The defense relies on what researchers call the Maghreb route. It's basically an Indiana Jones map of manuscript preservation. The claim is that as the Ibadis were being heavily persecuted in Iraq, the physical manuscripts were carried out of Basra, smuggled across the desert all the way to North Africa, and deposited in the libraries of the Rustamed Imamate in Algeria.
So the books literally went into exile with the people.
Right. And then, when the Rustamed state eventually fell to its enemies, the books were hidden in caves and private underground libraries in the desert, handed down silently from teacher to student for generations. They argue there is a continuous physical custody, a chain of possession, even if the outside world never saw the receipts until the 12th century.
It's a very romantic image. Ancient scrolls hidden in caves while empires burn outside. But let's actually get into the content of those scrolls. Because even if we accept the book is incredibly old, the stuff inside it drives the other major sects crazy. I want to talk about the sectarian crossfire. Why do the Sunnis so thoroughly reject it?
Well, put yourself in the shoes of a classical Sunni scholar. You have your 6 books, Bukhari, Muslim, and so on. You have built your entire legal code, your theology, your daily life on them. Then this random book shows up from a minority group you've politically marginalized.
And the chain is totally different, as we just discussed.
Right, and not only is the chain different, but the content is missing huge chunks of what you consider to be foundational Islam.
Like what? What's noticeably missing?
It's what scholars call the Ahad problem. The Musnad consists mostly of solitary reports that just aren't found in the big Sunni collections at all. But more importantly, for the average believer, it omits famous everyday traditions.
So things people do every day are just not in there.
Exactly. For example, specific details on exactly how to position your hands during prayer that Sunnis consider standard, not there. Dramatic prophecies about the end times and the Antichrist. Totally different or just completely missing.
So a Sunni looks at this and says, well, if this is the authentic, pure record, why is it missing half the story of our religion?
Precisely. It feels incomplete to them. And the Shia critique of the book is even sharper.
Right, because for Shia Muslims, the absolute pivot point of history is Ali ibn Abi Talib and the family of the Prophet.
And I'm guessing you saw how the Musnad handles that.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly paint the picture they want.
It has a massive Ali problem from a Shia perspective. The event of Ghadir Khan, which is where Shias believe the Prophet explicitly appointed Ali as his divine successor, is completely absent from the text.
That's a huge omission.
Yeah.
That's the bedrock of Shia theology.
It is the foundational event, and it's just not there. The Musnad treats Ali as a great companion, sure, but it also critiques him. It contains reports that imply he made terrible political decisions during the early civil wars, and it completely ignores the theology of the 12 Imams or the idea of hereditary spiritual leadership.
Which goes back to what we called the third way earlier. It feels like they are deliberately carving out a position that rejects both the Sunni imperial model and the Shia bloodline model.
That's exactly it. The Musnad reflects the core Ibadi view of imama, or leadership. To them, leadership isn't genetic. It's not about being from the elite tribe of Quraysh, like the Sunnis traditionally say, and it's not about being from the Prophet's direct family, like the Shias say.
It's just about who is the best for the job.
It's a strict meritocracy. The most pious, capable person should be elected by the community, period, and if they fail, if they become corrupt, they should be forcefully removed. The Musnad reflects that almost Republican, democratic ideal. It completely strips away the divine right of kings.
Which obviously explains why the kings at the time didn't really like them.
Exactly.
But this difference isn't just political, is it? It gets deeply metaphysical. I was reading the sources about the vision of God controversy, and this seems to be where the theology gets really heated.
Oh, this is probably the biggest theological clash in the entire text.
Yeah.
In standard Sunni Hadith traditions, there are very famous reports saying that on Judgment Day, believers will physically see God. The phrase used is often that you will see him as clearly as you see the full moon. It's a sensory, visual experience.
And in the Musnad.
Total radio silence. Those full moon hadiths are completely gone.
So the accusation from the Sunni critics is that Rabi, or whoever edited the book later, took a red pen to the Prophet's words because they just didn't like the theology.
That is the exact charge. You deleted the hadiths that didn't fit your worldview because Ibadis, along with the rationalist Mutazilites of the time, believe God is absolutely transcendent. He doesn't have a physical body. He doesn't occupy physical space. He literally cannot be seen with human eyeballs. So for them, the idea of seeing God like a glowing moon in the sky is borderline blasphemy.
So they flipped the script on the critics.
Right. They argue, we didn't delete anything. We preserved the pure original. You guys added the anthropomorphic folklore later on when you mixed with other cultures. It's a classic case of he said, she said, but with the literal nature of the afterlife at stake.
Wow. Okay, there's another term in the text that scares people, and we need to touch on this. Kafir nima. When I was reading the translations and the sources, the book seems to be using the word kafir, which usually means unbelievers or infidel, for regular Muslims who just commit sins.
This brings up the shadow of the Kharijite label. Historically, the Kharijites were violent extremists who said, if you commit a major sin, you are an apostate, you've left Islam, and we can lawfully kill you. And mainstream Sunnis often lump Ibadis in with those extremists.
And the Musnad actually uses that harsh language.
It does use the word kufr, but, and this is a really vital nuance, modern Ibadi scholars argue the Musnad makes a very sharp legal distinction that the extremists didn't. There is kufr shirk, which is actually worshipping idols or formally leaving the religion entirely, and then there is kufr nima.
Which translates to what in practice?
Ingratitude. It's the hypocrisy of enjoying God's blessings while actively disobeying him. The argument is, if you commit a major sin, you are ungrateful. You are in a state of severe spiritual crisis. But, and this is the key, you are not an apostate. You absolutely cannot be killed. Your property is safe. You are still part of the community.
So it's a strict moral code and harsh language, but it's not a violent legal code.
That is how they separate themselves from the violent extremists of history. It's about intense social pressure to repent, not violent excommunication. But you can definitely see why an outsider reading the text without context might get very nervous seeing the word kafir thrown around so casually.
Absolutely. It sounds radical until you read the fine print. But speaking of reading the fine print, let's talk about the science in the book. Because we have atheists and secular historians looking at this text in these sources too, and they see things that just do not match a modern biology or physics textbook.
Right. If you are looking for scientific miracles that prove the text is divine, this might not be your stop. There are traditions in the Musnad implying the heart is the literal seat of intellect, like you physically think with your chest.
Which we know isn't true. We think with our brains.
And there are descriptions of the cosmos, things like the 7 Earths, that clearly reflect the limited worldview of an 8th century desert society.
So how does a modern, highly educated Omani, maybe a doctor or a physicist, read this today? Do they just pretend that part of the book isn't there?
Not at all. They use a well-established interpretive tool called ta'wil. It means metaphorical interpretation. Modern Ibadi scholars, like Sheikh Nasser al-Sabia, argue that the prophet wasn't sent to teach astronomy or anatomy to the world. He was speaking in the idioms and the cultural language of his specific time.
So if he had started talking about neurons and expanding galaxies, people in the 7th century desert would have just looked at him blankly.
Exactly. The moral message wouldn't have landed at all because the vehicle was too alien. So they argued the Musnad is strictly a book of moral guidance, and the scientific references are just the cultural packaging of that era. You don't take the packaging literally.
That actually brings us to the hardest part of the conversation, the ethics. Because the Musnad is, at its core, an 8th century text, and it regulates things that we find completely abhorrent today. Slavery, concubinage, unequal legal testimony for women, harsh physical punishments.
It does. It absolutely reflects the economy, the tribal warfare, and the social structure of the 8th century.
So if that's the case, does a modern Ibadi judge in a court in Muscat open this book and say, well, the Musnad allows slavery, so it's legal today?
No. And this is a really important insight into how Islamic law actually functions in a modern civil state, which critics often miss. They don't apply the historical text literally like a modern penal code. They use a broad legal concept called maqasid al-sharia.
The objectives of the law.
Right, prioritizing the spirit over the letter. The Grand Mufti of Oman and other leading scholars argue that the ultimate overarching goal of the law is justice, mercy, and human dignity. They also use a framework called state and stage.
State and stage, how does that work?
They argue that certain specific rules in the Musnad, like the harsh physical punishments or the rules of tribal war, were for a specific stage of history, often a state of constant defense or survival where prisons didn't exist. They argue that society is now in a modern civil state with entirely different social contracts and infrastructure.
So the text remains sacred as a historical and spiritual document, but it doesn't literally dictate the criminal code of 2026.
Exactly. Oman uses a modern civil legal code. This framework allows them to revere their origins without being trapped by 8th century sociology. It's a very deliberate separation between the text as a marker of identity and the text as a literal daily legal manual.
It seems like a constant, exhausting balancing act. I mean, you have to defend the book against Sunnis who say it's completely fake, while simultaneously explaining away the parts of it that don't fit the modern, egalitarian world.
That is the heavy burden of the third way. You are fighting a two-front war, both historically against empires and modernly against secular critiques.
So let's zoom out as we wrap this up. We've been really deep in the weeds of theology, manuscript chains, and legal frameworks. But for the listener who isn't Muslim, who isn't Ibadi, who maybe just likes history, why does this matter? Why should we care about the Musnad of al-Rabi?
Because history is almost always written by the winners. The Sunnis and Shias built massive globe-spanning empires. They wrote the textbooks, they built the universities, they defined what Islam looked like to the outside world. This book, this is a rare surviving voice from the losing side.
The resistance.
It's a genuine counter-narrative. It proves that early Islam wasn't a monolith. It wasn't just one agreed-upon thing. It was this vibrant, chaotic marketplace of ideas in places like Basra, where everyday people were fiercely debating free will, the ethics of leadership, and the very nature of God. And the fact that the specific physical book survived traveling from the underground cells of Iraq to the remote caves of Algeria and finally to Oman is just an incredible testament to human resilience.
It's not just a book of quotes. It's a survival kit.
That's a great way to put it. It shows how a marginalized, hunted community used a text to build an impenetrable fortress around their identity. They didn't have a grand emperor to protect them, so they had a book. And that book kept them from dissolving into the masses over 14 centuries.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to chew on. We've analyzed the chains, the paper, the politics, the modern laws. But if we could go back, if we could somehow teleport to Basra 1,200 years ago and sit in that secret room with Rabi ibn Habib.
I know exactly what I'd ask him.
What's that?
I wouldn't ask about the theology. I wouldn't ask him to verify his chain of narrators. I'd ask about his deep personal intent. Did he compile these traditions because he historically, factually believed this was the absolute only way to save the prophet's pure words? Or did he compile them because he knew his community was under siege and they desperately needed something distinctively theirs just to survive the empire?
Did he write to objectively preserve history? Or did he write to construct a lifeboat for his people?
Right. And does the answer to that question change the inherent value of what he actually saved?
That is the question you have to ask when you read history. Whether it's a perfect recording or a perfect shield, it's still here, and it shaped millions of lives. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.